Okay, we might kick off now because I see that we've got loads of participants, and you're so welcome and thanks for joining us on a really sunny evening. It's so nice that the light is back. My name's Rosie Leonard. I am the Network Development Coordinator at Friends of the Earth. And I'm going to be doing a quick introduction, and then I'm going to be handing you over to some of the rest of our team who are going to talk about our campaigns, and you're going to hear more from us and the rest of the team throughout the night on ways to get involved. So firstly, I'd just like to say a little bit about what we're doing tonight. So we are looking at a kind of this is a new format that we haven't really tried before in Friends of the Earth, where rather than just do informational sessions on specific issues around climate justice that we work on, we wanted to actually try and talk about ways that people can meaningfully get involved in their context. So what we're going to be doing is looking at some of our main campaigns. We've got 4 campaigns that we're going to talk to you about tonight. And we're going to talk about things that we think either groups, individuals, networks that already exist, students, loads and loads of different groups and communities in Ireland can make an impact this year around climate justice. And we're also going to be sharing resources to help groups to take action. And we also have an invitation for you at the end. Just before we kind of get into the meat of it, we just wanted to take a minute to kind of remind ourselves and everyone in our network of what Friends of the Earth Ireland works on and what our values are. So our values, kind of broadly put, are based around 4 things. They're based around solidarity. So that's solidarity with different struggles in Ireland, and it's also solidarity with different groups around the world. We're obviously part of an international network in Friends of the Earth. And we have groups across the whole globe. So that is a really, really important part of our work. Participation and inclusion are very central. We're always looking for ways that people can participate in climate action directly in Ireland. And obviously nature and people, the kind of need for 2 things to come together, a just world where people and nature thrive. And it's really important to say that all of this work is grounded in the idea of system change, which is different to just individual change, and it's different to just behavioral change. It's actually looking at what are the deep system changes we need to actually meet our climate goals and obligations and prevent climate breakdown. So this is looking at things in a very, very detailed way and a very deep sense. So system change is at the root of everything we do. And this photo, I love this photo. I can't tell if she's here, but this is Ruth, who's involved in Dublin Friends of the Earth, who are one of our local groups. And this is from when we joined the cost of living demonstration last summer. So if you're there, Ruth, I hope you're glad we're using your photo. I love it so much. I use it at every opportunity. You might have heard me say this word climate justice a few times. If you have been involved in Friends of the Earth for a while, you probably know already well what it means. But if you haven't, it's an important concept that we use more so than, say, just climate action. Climate justice is stronger than that. It's a call to action. And it's an understanding that those who have done the least to cause climate breakdown are the ones worst affected by it. And we've seen these effects very starkly in recent years. We saw them last year very starkly in flooding, in droughts, in famine, particularly in the Horn of Africa. And it's really a central way of understanding the actions we need to take on a local, but a national and also a global level to right this wrong, basically. And it's also very important to say that, like, climate breakdown, as the effects of climate breakdown get worse, it deepens poverty, it deepens inequality. And climate justice is very much a framework to help us fight back against this and to unite all of the different effects and causes and struggles to provide the movement and the strength and power we need to actually right what is happening. So what can we do about it? Well, that's what we're here tonight to talk about. So we're going to talk to you about many, many different issues and many different targets. And all of these different targets are opportunities to organise. So we're going to talk about climate justice at a local level, also at a national level. We're going to talk a little bit perhaps about things that are happening in the international context, but what's really, really important is that this information is not just giving you information and telling you what's happening. It's actually trying to empower you to take this to your own context and your own decision makers, be that local TDs, be that local councillors, be that different agencies. This is all about what can be applied in your context. And I'm a really big fan of this phrase, organise where you stand. So some of you may be in universities, some of you may be in workplaces, some of you may be in communities, and you see an opportunity to take action on something you hear about tonight. That is very much the point of it. And we do have some groups later on that I'll talk to you about that you could potentially join, or maybe you already know about, but it's very much about taking action in the context that you are already in and in different ways with others around you. So what I'm going to do is I am going to hand over, I'm just going to stop sharing for 1 second so that I can hand over to my colleague Claire. Claire O'Connor is our Energy Poverty Policy Coordinator, and she does a lot of work around energy poverty, pollution and warmer homes for all. And she's going to talk to you a little bit about the campaign, ways that you can get involved. Then we're going to go through other campaigns. And one thing I would just ask is, because it's a webinar, if you can ask questions in the chat, there's a Q&A function. And what we'll do is at the end of all of these presentations, we'll come back and go through the Q&A. So Claire, just bear with me 1 second while I share my screen again. And there is all sorts of madness going on my screen. Here we go. So Claire, you take it away, and whenever you need to move slides, just let me know.
Great stuff. Thanks a million, Rosie. I won't be too long doing a quick introduction to the Warm Homes for All campaign. So yeah, I'm Claire. I'm the Energy Policy Officer for Friends of the Earth. And I work mainly on this Warm Homes for All campaign, which looks at decarbonisation of heat, getting our homes off fossil fuels and making sure that everyone has access to energy efficiency measures and clean and renewable energy. So it looks at energy poverty as well. So you can go to the next slide there and see. Thank you. Yeah, so our built environment in Ireland currently contributes to 37% of our emissions annually. Now that's across construction, but it's also across actual energy use in buildings day to day. So heat and waste energy are a really big part of that. 60% of Irish homes currently have a building energy rating of a D or a lower, and that is quite significant, because if you look up here of the 3 root causes of fuel poverty, as well as low incomes and inequality and high energy costs, which is really relevant for the past year, inefficient homes is one of the 3 root causes of energy poverty. And we've really seen that now in the past year, because I think as of April last year, 1/3 of Irish households were classified as living in energy poverty, which means that they were spending more than 10% of their income on their energy needs. That was April 2022, so that was before the winter price hikes. And I think the ESRI had estimated that if prices were to go up again, it would be almost 50% of Irish households actually living in energy poverty. And I think we've seen that, I think, over the past winter. So why that's relevant, I guess, to this work then is because retrofitting is actually a win-win, both for bringing down emissions and for reducing energy poverty, as it tackles that issue of inefficient homes, and it can also bring your energy costs down as well. This last year has highlighted the dangers of fossil fuel dependence, and it locks us into energy poverty and to energy insecurity, while also fueling climate chaos and war as well. So it's going to be crucial that any efforts to get off fossil fuels now also tackle energy poverty and make sure that everyone has access to clean and affordable energy. So we've seen the government set targets of retrofitting 500,000 homes by 2030. They want to retrofit 500,000 homes to a B2 standard. whereas last year just 8,481 retrofits were completed to a B2. So they're not really on track to actually achieve these targets, unfortunately. We have seen some really positive steps in terms of new grants being available for retrofitting, but they still exclude a really big cohort of Irish society, such as tenants, people on lower incomes, the traveller community, and then people who own older properties as well can't avail of many of these grants. So there's still a way to go to make sure that this is actually accessible for a really big cohort of Irish society. As well as that, while improving the energy efficiency of our buildings, we also need to actually get the buildings off fossil fuels and change the way we heat our buildings as well. At the moment, Ireland has the lowest levels of renewable heat in the EU. You see that little graph, we're at the very, very end in terms of renewable heat. Now, the government have committed to installing 400,000 heat pumps in homes by 2030, but they're still not quite there yet in existing buildings. For new buildings, there's some really strong regulations where the vast majority of new builds now have heat pumps and some forms of renewable heating. But the issue is there's no regulations for existing buildings, so there's no real stick, I guess, to get people to install heat pumps in their existing buildings. So on to the next slide there, Rosie, please. Oh, thanks. Sorry, I'm looking at a different one. So the demands for our campaign are, we have a good few of them, and I think we'll send out a resource at the end with a big report we did recently on energy poverty, which has, I think, 49 different recommendations. But some of the big ones that we'll be focusing on this year in our campaigning and advocacy work is we want the government to retrofit all social housing by 2030. Of the 500,000 homes that they want to retrofit by 2030, only 36,500 of them are local authority owned social housing. And it's actually tenants in this particular type of housing that are quite vulnerable to energy poverty. So we think the government should really take a much bigger leadership role in that by retrofitting all social housing by 2030. As I said earlier, the tenants in the private rental sector are left out of current retrofit measures. They're kind of at the mercy of the landlord as to whether or not they'll make a decision to retrofit the home they live in or not. Tenants don't have that level of agency to control over whether or not the home is retrofitted. So we kind of need to see that new regulations come in, minimum energy performance standards for the private rental sector. This has been committed to in the government's Housing for All plan starting in 2025, but we haven't really heard anything on that since. They're not sending those signals out to landlords yet that these minimum energy performance standards will be introduced. We need to see really strong tenant protections as well. We don't want tenants to be at risk of being evicted for the sake of their home being retrofitted. So it's really important that that's really clear. And there's lots of clarity on exactly what those protections are. And we need to see incentives as well as a stick for landlords. We need to see that carrot as well to make sure landlords are actually incentivized to retrofit. We need to see a phase out of fossil fuel boilers in existing homes, starting from 2029 at the very latest. As I said, new builds, the vast majority of heat pumps, but we're not seeing that level of action or that level of policy focus on existing buildings. We need to see community energy advisors deployed in every community as well. That's echoing an ask from St. Vincent de Paul, which can support at-risk households with their energy costs and to help households to transition to lower carbon energies as well. And we want to see a redesigned fuel allowance as well to make sure that's means tested and it's open to all and low incomes, and it's providing year-round support, and it also takes into account household BER, which is one of the key factors in a household falling into energy poverty as well. And as well as that, we want to see an Energy Poverty Act being introduced that sets a legal definition for what exactly energy poverty is, sets down ministerial duties, and introduces legally bound targets for reducing energy poverty as well. And on to the next one there, Rosie. Thank you. So yeah, why is this important? So it's really that people who are already marginalised and are already excluded from society in many ways are often living in the worst housing conditions. they may not have the agency to switch to new, cleaner and cheaper ways of heating their homes. They're locked into fossil fuel infrastructure, which also means they're at the mercy of volatile energy prices. And they don't have the capacity to actually engage in the energy transition, further marginalizing them and keeping them at maybe the margins of society and not fully involved in it. And next one, Rosie, please. Thank you. Yeah, so how you can get involved and take action. We've recently launched an energy crisis survey to get an idea of our supporters' attitudes towards the energy crisis, how it's impacted them, and what they see as the solutions. That's really going to inform a lot of our campaigning and advocacy in this area as well. We'd really encourage people to actually do something similar in your own area to get an idea of people's attitudes and what they think and what their ideas are in terms of retrofitting and heat pumps. We'd also want people to email our ministers directly and demand higher social housing retrofits. That's for Minister Darragh O'Brien, the Minister of Housing. And then from Minister Eamon Ryan, we want to ask him to do a retrofit plan for the private rental sector and Energy Property Act from the Community Energy Advisors too. And then Minister Heather Humphreys for the redesign of the fuel allowance. Thanks. I think that's fine.
Thanks so much, Claire. And just to remind people, we have a Q&A function. So if there are questions that you're thinking of as we're going through the campaigns, please just stick it in the Q&A and we will get to it at the end of the presentations. I am going to go to Oisín next. There you go, Oisín, you should be spotlit. And Oisín, who I think many of you will be familiar with, Oisín is the Director of Friends of the Earth Ireland, and he is leading aspects of our climate campaign. So Oisín, take it away.
Thanks, Rosie. So as Rosie said, I co-lead our climate campaign with Sive. So I'd like Sive, who's a familiar face to many of you to reintroduce herself, as she hasn't been in a webinar with Friends of the Earth for a while.
Good evening, everybody. I'm here as the new coordinator of the Stop Climate Chaos Coalition and the campaign coordinator for Friends of the Earth. Back to you, Oisín.
So Sive joined us in the last couple of weeks, and we're still in the handover stage. So you'll forgive us if we fumble along the way in any way. Anyway, Rosie, can you bring us to the next slide? So you'll have heard us use the phrase faster and fairer climate action, which on the previous slide, it was what we called our work around the election in 2020 and the work from then until we passed the climate law in 2021. Well, we didn't pass it, the Dáil and the Shannon passed it, but our campaigning was integral to that, both Friends of the Earth and Stop Climate Chaos and the One Future Network and many others. So the context now, though, is a little different. Now the challenge is to actually get to zero pollution fast enough to prevent complete climate chaos and fairly enough to leave no one behind. That's how we've described it. And if you're on our mailing list, which I'm guessing most of you are, you'll have seen us describe that as the race to zero and the race of a lifetime. And we've been using that phrase since the law was passed, and we've been turning our attention to the nitty-gritty of the actual ways we reduce pollution. Now, the law is still playing out, and we mentioned we're still working on that, but the law is passed now. The legally binding national and sectoral targets have been adopted last year in 2022, and the policy direction has been set in the climate action plans that came out in 2021 and the end of last year as well. Now it's all about national and local government, crucially, we'll be talking more about that, actually implementing the measures that cut pollution radically and urgently. So the difference now, apart from the fact it's not just the Oireachtas we're focused on, is that there's far more fronts, for want of a better word, like places where we need to fight for climate action. More than there was when it was a kind of one big campaign for an awful long time, some of you will know, for a strong climate law with binding targets. We got that. Now there's housing, there's transport, there's energy, there's agriculture, and there's the law process itself. So there's an awful lot more places for us to be active, and we have to try to focus, and that's what partly this evening is about, is to spotlight a number of the areas where we think it makes most difference for our supporters to get active. Because we're already seeing reluctance and resistance pop up in new places and old, from people, fighting over car parking spaces in Dean's Grange, and putting cars before bikes, to the usual big business putting profit before planet, whether it's big agribusiness or data centers. So we have our work cut out for us. And so I want to talk to Rosie, if you bring me to the next slide, talk a little bit about what this means in practice now. So that introduction is by way of saying that the Faster and Fairer Climate Action campaign and work that we do actually is more of a program than a single campaign. There's lots of elements to what we do to try to build the pressure required to get that to get faster and fairer climate action. And I'm going to focus primarily on one of those elements tonight to talk about how you all can get involved. But I'll mention a couple of others, which actually some others will be talking about. There's the work that's called here Accountable, which is the work of accountability, and SIVE and Stockholm Case will be very, very central to this. And that's our work to hold the government to account for cutting pollution in line with the binding limits on national and sectoral emissions, the binding limits on those emissions. So, making sure the law is actually being followed in terms of parliamentary accountability and plans and so on. A lot of advocacy work, possibly less campaigning though than there was when we were campaigning for the law, but that work will be going on and there will be opportunities for people to be involved. There's work around transport, which I've called Let's Get Moving here, our work to break our dependence on private cars by ensuring space and investment for buses, cycling and walking, especially safe routes to school. And I'll mention that in the context of what I'm going to talk about tonight, but there's a work ongoing on that more generally as well. And then my colleague Deirdre, I think, will be talking about Every School is Solar School, which is the latest phase of our Solar Schools campaign, to make sure the government delivers on its new promise that we all won together, which came last October in the budget, to fund solar panels on every school in Ireland. So they've promised it now, and we're going to be campaigning to make sure they deliver it. And Deirdre will be saying more about that. What I want to focus on, the element of the Faster and Fairer Climate Action I want to focus on, is which I've called here is Act Local. You'll all know the phrase "Think Global, Act Local," and actually it's been attributed to a number of people, but one of those it's been attributed to is David Bauer, who was the founder of Friends of the Earth in the US at the very beginning in 1969, and certainly he's one of those who popularized it. But I think it's particularly appropriate for what we need to do now. And again, if you've seen our emails about the Race to Zero in 2021, or particularly last year at the end of 2022, it's about this turn to the local, that we think now more than ever before, we need to have people acting and speaking out locally about climate action with friends and neighbors, local groups and decision makers locally, because many of the decisions that we now need to see taken in order to get emissions coming down are actually going to be made locally. And for example, there are, that means local councils, for example, spending their active travel budget. Rosie, you can move to the next slide. Since just last week, I think it was last week, maybe the week before, the Minister for the Environment has signalled the start of a new deadline for local councils to prepare their own climate action plans to reduce pollution under the climate law. For the first time, there'll be statutory local authority plans to reduce pollution in their remit. So that's, and of course, there are local council elections in 2024. So Friends of the Earth hasn't worked that much on local councils. We have tended to a little bit of time of elections, but it is a strategic decision we've made in the last year that it's one of the key battlegrounds, for want of a better word, to actually see action take place, to get the Race to Zero up and running. So so what we want, we want local councils to spend their active travel budgets, they're not all doing it, on cycling and walking. We want a priority focus on safe routes to school, because it's very hard to be against that, to allow children to travel safely to school. We want to apply the furthest behind first and no one left behind principles, which are core to the Sustainable Development Goals, to the retrofitting work that local councils do, prioritising social housing first, but also allowing everyone in a street or an estate join in to any scheme that the council is running. This is happening in Fingal, for example, because then they can benefit from even if they're paying themselves and they aren't getting it all done by grants, which would be the case for social housing. They can benefit from the collective purchasing and contracting that the local council can do, and it can feel like a really community project. But it has to be led by the council, or it won't really happen. We need councils to refuse planning permission for any more data centres. That will be talked more about later on, and we want to make sure that local authorities do really bold and brave climate action plans that they have to produce over this year, in line with the climate law and in line with the binding limits we now have on national and sectoral emissions. So finally, how you can get involved, Rosie, the last slide, is what you can do locally. Well, we have a new action pledge going live tonight, and you'll be getting it in the email that follows up this webinar. which is our Earth Day Action Pledge, about what you're up for doing this year to make faster and fairer climate action more likely. So you can take that pledge to kind of remind yourself what you're agreeing to do, and the sort of things you can do are talk to your local councillors about any of our demands. Particularly now, as we're only a year out from an election, they will be delighted to talk to any of their local constituents and tell them it's the sort of things we want to see, and tell them it's okay if there's less road space for private cars. They're only hearing at the moment from people who are concerned about actions happening, whatever it might be. They need to hear from people who want action to happen. We're launching, there'll be a slide on this at the end, we're launching a Cuppa for Climate with Friends of the Earth to give your friends and neighbours somewhere to talk about the climate crisis, the anxiety it causes, and how action is the best antidote to anxiety. We're launching that on Earth Day with an event you'll be in Dublin that you'll all be invited to, but you can host one locally is the plan, as a way to engage friends and neighbours in what we want to see, this groundswell of support for climate action at local level. If there's a local group in your area, it doesn't have to be a Friends of the Earth group or a One Future group, any group that's active on the environment, you can get active in that group, or you can help set one up, because together you can be more powerful. And finally, this is one example, it may be that we need to hold demos outside local council offices and over the next year, so they know we're paying attention to what they're doing. There'll be public consultations and there'll be chances to participate, but we know consultations on their own can be ignored. We need to demonstrate people power over the next year so that they know that they need to come up with action plans and implement action that will cut emissions. And finally, there'll be more coming in this soon. We're going to have a rapid response media action group, not just locally, but across Ireland, inviting our supporters to get involved in, talking to Liveline or texting in shows when climate is debated, because we need to help shape that public debate. Because there'll be more and more voices concerned and agitated about the impact of climate action. We need to keep reminding people about the impact of inaction and the positive benefits of action. And we want as many of you as possible to be part of that. Thanks very much. Thanks, Rosie.
Thanks, Oisin. And just a reminder, I think most people know by now, but we have a Q&A function and we're going to answer questions at the end. So if you have any questions specifically around our climate campaign and taking local action, as Oisin mentioned, just pop them in the Q&A, and we will be talking more about other ways and how we can support you to take action as well. And now I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Jerry. I'm just going to spotlight you, Jerry. And Jerry is going to talk to us more about No New Gas and our fossil-free campaign.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Jerry McKevely. I'm the head of policy in Friends of the Earth. And I'm going to give you a whistle-stop tour of our actions on gas or against fossil fuels and our No New Gas campaign. So I think if you're on a Friends of the Earth webinar or event, you're probably well aware of the problems of fossil fuels, but this slide here before you is maybe just to give you some of the context and maybe to give you a bit better of an understanding of why we're campaigning on this issue and why we're putting forward the demands that are out there. So first of all, I'm going to wow you by going through these 4 images. So I'll be on this slide for about a minute or so. But you'll see there, for starting in the top left, that's an image taken from the latest IPCC synthesis report, showing the extremely damaging impact of as we go above 1.5 degrees of an increasingly warmer and more damaging climate. And how does this relate back to fossil fuels? Well, from a few different perspectives, some of which you're probably very familiar with already, but previous reports under the IPCC have shown the urgency of the climate crisis and stated that greenhouse gases, which stem from our reliance on fossil fuels and land use, are causing unprecedented levels of global heating. And more specifically, more than half a century of burning fossil fuels, as well as unequal and unsustainable land use, has led to global warming already of 1.1 degrees above pre-industrial levels. And the results also indicate that these emissions from existing fossil fuel infrastructure are more than enough to push the world beyond the 1.5 degree threshold. And there's also other research showing that the world's governments plan to produce more than twice the amount of fossil fuels by 2030 that will be consistent with the 1.5 degree threshold. What does that mean? It means we need a rapid and equitable phase out of fossil fuels based on a just transition. What's the other context? The other context is that gas is bloody expensive, and it's causing huge problems, as Claire has outlined, for energy poverty. It's obviously not the case that everyone uses gas in their homes, but for Ireland and many other European states, gas is used to generate electricity. So that's why you're seeing electricity prices going up, and it's pushing more and more people into energy poverty, as you've just said, or Claire's just said rather. And that the other point to remember is that these fossil fuels are highly subsidized, which is precisely the opposite of what we should be doing right now. We should be moving these subsidies away from fossil fuels. Now, I've addressed that other slide on how fossil fuel prices have increased in the past year. But the other important context is around data centers. Again, some of you may be very familiar with this, but Deirdre and Rosie have done good work on this area and are going to show other information later on, specifically on the data center issue. But it's very important when you look at, how we generate electricity. What is the demand? What's the demand for that electricity? And increasingly, in an Irish context, it's due to the development of data centers, which is hugely problematic, because the basic point is where more and more data centers are developed, it's locking in more and more gas-fired power plants, essentially. And the other point is that it's taking up more and more renewables, renewables that are being rolled out, which makes it harder to meet our climate targets. So that's the context, and I'll go on to the demand slide now. So these come from lots of different angles, but these are the main fossil fuel related asks that Friends of the Earth are asking for. The first one is on permanent ban on commercial LNG, or a commercial LNG terminal. What's LNG? It's liquefied natural gas, which is a means of transporting gas from long distances. And we don't, similar to why we don't want any more fossil fuel exploration, production from new gas fields, we don't want a terminal developed in Ireland, which would force us into a reliance essentially on gas for years to come. So that's why that's one major ask, and that's very much focused on Shannon LNG, which is sort of the most advanced proposed terminal or piece of fossil fuel infrastructure. I've already addressed stopping data center connections, and Oisín mentioned the need to stop that at planning level and to really take this fight to our communities. Climate-proof mandates functions of state bodies. What in good God's name does that mean? That means, we sort of separate this out, we have a very strong piece of climate law in place. Public bodies, particularly those which have an energy function, need to be respecting those targets, those obligations. How did they do that? Now, you could argue just purely from a moral perspective, they should be abiding by and fulfilling those climate obligations, given that a public body is one part of the state. But in many cases, for example, in the case of Gas Networks Ireland, they're continuing to roll out gas infrastructure. So how do we need to change this? We need to change their functions. We need to change how they operate. That's not an easy process, but it needs to start. Related to this, also a very challenging area is we need to stop fossil fuel advertising, which is, we continue to see on our screens, and even, media which are more progressive or more supportive on the climate crisis, you're still continuing to see, whether it's from car companies, whether it's flights, whether it's fossil fuel companies, you're still continuing to see this advertising. And then making Ireland a global leader. I won't go through the details of this in too much detail, but basically some of you will be aware that the Paris Agreement is so important, but it doesn't mention fossil fuels. So while we have this obligation at international level to reduce our emissions, there's fossil fuels, as I've said before, fossil fuel infrastructure are continuing to be built. So we need Ireland to essentially step up to the plate at UN level and really call for the types of new obligations or cooperation to phase out fossil fuels and stop production on a just and equitable basis. And then moving just swiftly on, the last two are in brackets because you've heard some of this and you will hear some more of this later. So phasing out of fossil fuel boilers, that means getting fossil fuels out of homes, and then renewables and the need to push renewables and energy efficiency. You'll hear more about the solar side, our action on solar later on. So why is this important? What I have there are just really two key messages. I won't go through all of it, but the UN Secretary General has been absolutely clear that the climate activists aren't the dangerous radicals, and that this fossil fuel free-for-all must end now. And Professor Hannah Daly, who did really good research for us, showed you often see this argument that, you know, fossil fuels is needed for more security. That's not simply the case. And in fact, there are more risks around new gas than benefits from a security perspective. And we have research on that, which are in the links. But moving on to the next slide, please. What can you do? What can you do after all of that? So you've heard, you know, it's absolutely relevant and important to be bringing in this no new gas or combating fossil fuels in activities at local level that Oisin mentioned. In addition to that, or, you know, maybe just building on that, you should absolutely feel empowered to put these messages to your TD, to raise the issue of data centers, as I mentioned, and to really be clear, just even, and I appreciate this is sometimes very hard, but even asking the question among your, as it said there, you know, for example, your residents association, your community group, your class, your family, among friends, even starting the conversation can have really positive results. And then the final two pieces there, it's always good to share examples of misinformation and greenwashing by fossil fuel companies. Also, so, you know, we can share them and promote them, but to really sort of undermine the legitimacy and reputation of companies using fossil fuels, it's good for all of, you know, everyone here to be pointing this out as well, and not to assume that we've always seen it, you know, the people in this office, because sometimes we haven't. And some of you have great expertise and insights. And lastly, in your workplace, there's a whole other conversation we need to be having around or at least trying to start the conversation of not using or supporting firms, agencies, consultancies that are doing business with fossil fuel companies, whether that's sponsorship or advertising. So that's it, or at least I think that's it on my side.
Great, thank you so much, Jerry. And just to say, and to add what Jerry said, Jerry, you mentioned data centers a few times there. This is definitely a kind of emerging threat that has been growing over the last few years. And one thing that we've done quite a lot in Friends of the Earth is support local groups to oppose gas and fossil fuel infrastructure in their local communities, like fossil fuel plants. But increasingly what we are seeing is communities wanting to also resist data centres because the pressure they are putting on our grid and the fact that they are mostly gas powered is really, really dangerous. And as a result, we've actually produced a resource now on reasons to campaign against data centres, and you can campaign against them both at local level because they have to apply for local planning permission, and also at national level directly with TDs. And we'll be sending information on that in our resources later on. And the final campaign that we're going to hear from is with my colleague Deirdre. Deirdre is going to talk to you a little bit about our Solar Schools programme, which is especially relevant for any of you who have school children at home, or maybe some of you who are teachers or who work in schools. This is a really interesting campaign, and I'll let Deirdre tell you more about it.
Thanks, Rosie. I might go on to the second slide there. So yeah, I guess just to give a little bit of background, we've been working on our Solar Schools campaign to try and get solar panels on every school in Ireland for a good many years now. And I suppose one of the reasons why we kind of started this work was we saw the potential for schools to, I'm going to use a pun here, but to act as a beacon of light in their communities. And what I kind of mean by that is, I guess a school is often kind of at the center of a community. Lots of people are coming and going to and from it. It's got a roof, very visible. And if you had solar panels on that roof, and if the school was benefiting from being able to produce its own clean, renewable energy, it could create a really positive story about kind of small scale renewable energy that's owned and controlled, you know, by a not-for-profit organization like a school, and in the same way a community could own and control their own energy. So it's a really nice kind of way of showcasing the benefits of kind of small scale community owned energy. So we'd love to kind of see every school in Ireland running on sun, and then that could kind of create an appetite for similar community owned energy in the communities around the schools. So we've been campaigning on this for a good number of years, and our supporters have been brilliant. People like you who are at the webinar today, you've helped us actually achieve an awful lot. So kind of thanks to our campaigning and to your actions in supporting that campaigning, we now have a position where people, communities and schools who generate energy on a small scale, so micro generators, can get paid for any excess energy that they produce that they then sell to the grid. They can share it with the grid and sell it. That didn't happen before. Another thing that we've been campaigning on for a long time was to get planning regulations updated, because initially and up until very recently, it was really difficult and expensive for schools to install solar panels. Even if they wanted to install just one panel, they had to apply for planning permission, which can be quite expensive, or is quite expensive, you know, and time consuming and bureaucratic. So thanks to campaigning, the government have now updated the regulations, so schools don't need to apply for planning permission to get panels on their roofs. So it's all really good news, really positive news. And I say invite anyone who's been involved in this, and I know a lot of you have, on this webinar, to just give yourselves a clap in the back, because we've achieved great things together. So we should celebrate that, but we're not going to stop here. We're wary. Oh, and the other thing I should say is the really good news is that the government have now promised in last year's budget, so budget 2023, they promised to provide funding for every school in the country to put solar panels on their roof. So it's terrific news. We should celebrate it, but we're wary that there could be delays with that funding being rolled out. So we're not going to, you know, sit and just wait to see if it will happen. We're going to put pressure on them, and we're going to do more campaigning to make sure that happens. And I'll talk about that in a bit more detail in a minute. But first of all, I want to just show you a little animation. It's just a 2-minute animation, which kind of goes through what I've been talking about in a nice way. So Rosie, should I share it on my screen?
Yeah, if you do, I'm going to stop sharing, Deirdre, and you should be able to take over.
Great. So am I on the right screen now, Rosie? Can you see my YouTube animation?
Yeah, if you just full screen it there.
Brilliant.
And it's at 11 seconds starting, so I just roll it back to the beginning.
Great. I'm just going to share my sound as well. So
this means that we can make our own Hi, I'm Sean. Because of me and my friends, we have solar panels on our school. This means that we can make our own electricity in a way that's friendly to the earth from the sun. We can even share extra electricity we make with our community. And my school can use that money to make better classrooms for us. This didn't come easy. Even though everyone in the school wanted solar panels, it took the government years to make it happen. I was in junior infants when we first asked. We almost gave up because it took so long and there were so many obstacles, but we didn't. Instead, we stood together with Friends of the Earth and stayed strong to make our future brighter. And it worked! You can do the same. Now, every school in Ireland is entitled to new and free solar panels, but we need to make sure the government does it now. There's no time to waste. Make sure you tell your teachers, parents, and friends to make sure the government keeps their promise on time. If you want to tell the Minister of Education to make sure all the schools in Ireland get their solar panels, visit the Friends of the Earth website. You can make sure your school runs on sun and be a beacon of light for Ireland. When we work together, we can make a difference with solar and community power. Let's do this!
Amazing, thanks Deirdre. I'm going to share my screen again so that I can put the slides back up.
Sorry about the delay there. I started playing on my YouTube straight after. It distracted me. So that was a little animation just to kind of talk about what we're doing now. We'll be sharing that in the resources afterwards. So if you'd like to share it further, that would be really great. We'll also be sharing the e-action that was mentioned in it. I might just move on, Rosie, to the next slide, if that's okay. So I talked about, and the animation talked about wanting to make sure that there aren't delays to rolling out this funding for schools to put solar panels on their roof. So I suppose to be more general about it, we're campaigning to make sure schools get their panels without long delays. We can be a bit more specific too. So I suppose in terms of our demands at the moment, we're calling on, so we're actually now calling on the Minister for Education to do some work on this, because the funding for the solar panels for schools is now the responsibility of the Department of Education. So they're responsible for distributing that funding. And we're a little bit concerned in that the Department of Education haven't given any details yet on how schools can apply to get that funding, when schools can apply. So schools are kind of stuck, they can't really do anything. So we're calling on the Minister for Education, Norma Foley, to just provide information firstly on that, and kind of asking her to, you know, let us know when schools can apply, what's the process for applying, are there particular forms school have to need to fill out, and so on. And by doing that, we can kind of keep the pressure on for the department to keep thinking about this and to get it rolled out and into place as soon as possible. So we have an e-action that you can take to put those demands to the Minister yourself. So I'd really encourage you to do that. I might go to the next slide, Rosie. This is just a little bit about why this is so important. So I kind of talked about it a bit earlier, but just to say one more thing. Solar schools is such an important kind of project for us, because it creates that appetite for solar energy in localities, like I talked about before. And it's also just a really good example of small scale renewable energy that can be owned by small groups of people, by communities, not by big corporations. And we think, when we think of fossil fuels in particular, they're so centrally controlled, you know, so much power going to individual companies, because they essentially almost have, you know, they've almost like a dictatorship over our energy system. Whereas we have a chance with renewable energy to make it different, to make it small scale and community owned. So communities own and control the energy that they produce and benefit from it. And schools are a great example of that. And it's just a positive story, you know, of how climate action can be good And we have a little video which you're going to get, or another little video, a little film that you're going to get in your resource pack as well that we send after. Our communications officer, Lara, visited some schools that have got solar panels on their roof just before Christmas and did a lovely kind of feel-good video of talking to the students and just seeing the benefits that they're already getting from having solar. So I'd encourage you to watch that in your own time. And I'll just go to the last slide there, maybe, Rosie. So this is the ways that you can get involved and take action. So I've mentioned that e-action before, that will let you send an email to the Minister for Education. So I'd encourage you to do that. We'll share it after. Another thing you can do, if you've any connection with a local school, if you're a teacher, if you're a parent, if you're a student, or even if you just have a school, you know, in your area that you'd love to see them getting involved in this project, we're looking for schools to work with. And what we'd really like to see is for schools to be doing a number of activities that will just help keep up the drumbeat of pressure on the Department of Education to make sure the funding for solar panels is rolled out in time. And in the coming weeks, we'll be finishing a how-to guide for schools, and it basically has some background information, the videos that I talked about, and a little set of activities that schools can do. And when they complete those activities, we will then award the school with a lovely Solar Schools flag. You can see Solar Schools flags that we did before up in the top right corner there. You can see that was awarded in 2020, but we'll be doing nice new ones for 2023. So it's a lovely little way for a school to do a few little activities, you know, to get a flag and to play their bit in making sure every school gets their solar panels without delay. So that's another thing you can do. And I have a sign-up form, it's linked here, but again, we'll share it in the resources after, that you can fill in that specifically if you'd like to get emailed a how-to guide and some information specifically about getting your local school involved. Sign up to that form and we'll email it to you in a few weeks' time. And the last thing, I mentioned it before, but if you want to share and watch our Solar Schools film, which again we'll be sharing in the resources. So that's it. I'll hand back over to Rosie.
Thanks so much, Deirdre. That was amazing. What I'm going to do now is, we have had loads of questions coming in on the Q&A. I know some of them have been answered, but there are some that I think are really useful to talk about. And I'm going to try keep up with them as we go. Just to say, like, we in Friends of the Earth only work on certain campaigns, not because of lack of interest in other issues, it's just our capacity. So we mightn't have an answer for every single thing, but we will certainly try. I wanted to come to you first, Oisín, just on the idea of local councils. Don't look so surprised, Oisín. I wanted to ask, some people were asking in the chat, will two points, will Friends of the Earth support, I suppose, our supporters to engage councils on low climate action plans? And also an interesting one around, could pressure be put on councils to support things like fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty?
Yeah, and Sai might want to come in on what councils can and can't do, because she has a lot more experience of this than me. So on the fossil fuel, actually, what was the first one again, Rosie? Sorry, I was looking at the questions as you asked.
So the first one was around, will Friends of the Earth support our supporters to engage councils on local climate action plans?
Yes.
And I think you answered it already, but maybe worth saying it loud.
We will, but it's not, we haven't decided yet. And Sai, I know, has thoughts on this, so I definitely like to meet Sai. I'm not, some of you will remember that we went through an extraordinary process for the first climate action plan under this government, where I was reading this the other day for a funding report, where we had something like 35 experts over 8 webinars talking to some hundreds of people who'd signed up, and it was quite the undertaking, and it produced an awful lot of submissions from various people. But it's not clear to me that submissions to the consultations that the council run are necessarily the most effective way. I'd be interested to hear what Sai thinks. We're still developing this, as opposed to just communication from you as citizens to councillors and to officials to the extent that that's a possibility, about the fact that it needs to be bold and brave. And like, I think what made a difference at the last election was just lots of people telling the candidates who came to the doors that they cared about climate change. Now that's taken for granted. It's in the opinion polls about what the percentage is who think climate is a priority. At the time, we heard lots of TDs after us tell us that was new and that it had happened and it had affected their views. So we need the same happening with local councils, who are only hearing from people who are complaining about stuff right now and aren't hearing people who want climate action. So I bow to Sive's expertise in this, but I'm not sure we'll be producing like very detailed guides to all the things that councils should do under all their areas that they have authority. We may do that for some things, but I think it might be a more general point. And then on the fossil fuel and prevention treaty, I mean, Jerry would be better on this than me. I'm not sure. I mean, I know we've done this on GM again, Simon, and Jerry may know more than me. On GM and on fracking, individual councils pass motions. Whether that would be of any use on the non-proliferation treaty, which is about, you know, the larger international narrative around putting fossil fuels in the frame because they aren't in the Paris Agreement. I wouldn't rule it out, and obviously, you know, well, one of the things we're saying is people should go with where their energies are. If there's 2 or 3 or 4 of you who are really enthusiastic about engaging councillors on that, just go for it. I've forgotten the guy in Wicklow who did that on, and I've forgotten the issue he did it on, but literally one guy in Wicklow managed to get the local council with getting others to help him to pass a motion on something that I can't remember now, but it was around climate action. So this is really about saying, go with your energies. We will produce support and resource materials on a few key pillars of work, but we won't be able to do it on everything. Sive, do you want to add to that? Maybe with a bit more detail than I just did.
Well, no, I won't add more detail. I agree with you completely. I think we can help with providing some kind of slightly more technical resources if they're needed. Like, for instance, some of the things that are most relevant at local level might be around planning law, and, you know, the changes to the Planning and Development Act, that will be very relevant. And also issues like urban design and housing. So more the built environment, how it's planned, how it's built, and how the infrastructure that we have is managed by local authorities, because all of those things, whether it's waste or water or whatever, have enormous environmental impacts. And as we keep talking about, are not necessarily available to everybody in an equal way. There is still untreated sewage going into some rivers. So, you know, at a local level and looking at the functions of local authorities, we might be able to help in sort of, you know, providing some background material. But like Oisin said, that may not influence councillors at all. What does matter is the visibility of supporters of climate action. And sometimes people are reluctant to get involved in kind of contentious local debates about car parking and cycle lanes and the like, but it's kind of unavoidable. So maybe together we'll need to work through some strategies about how to navigate those situations. I'm looking for some ideas myself. And on the other thing, just about the functions of local government, yeah, councillors have very little power really. So yeah, it can help symbolically to pass motions on, you know, the fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. But what really matters is getting, you know, the government and the key political parties to commit to supporting that and pushing for that at EU level, because that's the reason I think Ireland is dragging its heels.
Thanks, all. We are going through the questions there. I want to take one for you, Deirdre, which is someone was asking about eco-anxiety and how to deal with it. And I think you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I typed an answer to that one. So it was just to share a number of webinars that we've done in the past on this issue. So I popped them into the answer there. There was one on hopeful chats about climate change, it was called, where we had people like the psychologist, Professor John Cherry, who dealt with it kind of from a psychologist point of view. And I also popped into the reply a recent blog we did, which kind of 6 tips to address eco-anxiety. And I guess it's a theme we're kind of, I suppose, looking at constantly, not every minute of every day, but it's something that we kind of sprinkle throughout our other work, because it is really important. And I guess, you know, our supporters who obviously really care about this stuff it can get to you at times, and it can get to all of us at times. So it's important that we acknowledge it and find ways that help us deal with it, and to help us keep taking action too, but also taking rest when we need to. So it's something we've been doing a bit on, and we'll continue to do more on.
I had one sentence, Rosie, which is that Rebecca Solnit, who some of you will know, who can't remember the name of her old book, but she's a new book out today with not just herself, but some others, called Not Too Late. And it's about finding hope and keeping hope alive in the face of the challenges we now have. And there's a way, I think the website around the book is called just Not Too Late. And the book is literally out today. And we definitely will think about doing a supporter event around that in the last part. We won't be doing it before the summer, but maybe in the last part of the year, like we have done previously on the book Warmth, and then that one that Deirdre mentioned, with John Sharry.
Great, thanks so much. There are loads and loads of questions in the chat, which is amazing. The only problem is we don't have a lot of time. So what I was going to suggest is my colleagues can answer questions directly into the Q&A. So there's questions there around what are fossil fuel subsidies and where are they taking place. There's questions there about Shannon LNG, about its relationship to the PCI list. There's a lot of questions actually about aviation, the lack of tax on fuel that is used by aviation companies, which is a really good question. There's also a question there about hydrogen. So what I will do is I will ask my colleagues maybe to continue asking or answering those questions, and we may, if we have time at the end, if people still have questions, no harm in writing them in, because we are going to be sending out an email afterwards to everyone who attended around all the resources that we have. And if there's questions that we see have come up time and time again, we might also answer them there, because kind of it's good to know. What I'm going to do now is we've heard a lot around taking action and what we can do. So before we leave tonight, I wanted to share how Friends of the Earth can support grassroots activists and groups to actually take action on the issues that we're talking about. So I'm going to share my screen again. Bear with me 1 second. And we've done that. I wanted to mention this. So I work in the Movement Building Circle with my colleague Emma Jane, who is also here tonight. And we think a lot about how to support the groups who are already fighting these issues in Ireland, how we can support to bring them together, how we can support new groups to emerge. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what ways we do this. So we've heard about multiple targets that we think we can make an impact in talking to this year. We've heard about talking to local councillors, local TGs, state agencies, ministers. Ministers have huge power over a lot of these issues, as Claire mentioned, especially around the issue of retrofitting and healthy homes. So the question is, how can we put pressure on them? And obviously we can do a lot in Friends of the Earth, but we're a strong believer in Friends of the Earth, in people power, and the idea of groups actually coming together and doing these things to increase and build all of the pressure that we need to change things. And what we can offer in Friends of the Earth is training and upskilling. We also support a lot around local organising. So some of you may be involved in Local One Future groups. Some of you may not be involved in Local One Future groups, but are interested in setting one up. Some of you are involved in Dublin Friends of the Earth. And we are always looking for opportunities for action. So where can groups identify actions they can take in their local communities? And we've had some examples of that. We've talked about data centres, gas plants, retrofitting of homes in local areas, school groups. All of these are opportunities to talk to our local communities and build pressure on decision makers to actually say, people in your constituency care about this. This is an issue for us, and we want to talk to you about it and make demands around it. And we need that. We need to be that voice. So there's a few things we have just released as of today, and you'll get this in your emails. A campaign guide, which is about 55 pages long and really, really, really useful. And I've just shared the contents page there to give you a sense of it. But this is a very practical nuts and bolts guide on supporting with the kind of day-to-day actions, power analysis, things that we need to put pressure on our decision makers. So I'll be sharing that with you in the follow-up email with all these resources. And we also hope to run some trainings on this later in the year on campaign skills. So if you're interested in that, keep an eye out because it will be in your emails. And I just wanted to mention our network. So Friends of the Earth, as I've said before, we support a lot of groups, we support a lot of grassroots activists. This is our kind of way of visualizing all of these people, and all of these people are you in some form or another. And our network is very wide. Like a lot of what we do in Friends of the Earth is trying to bring together groups who may already be working on similar things, or try and share skills and capacity. So we have locally organized working groups. We now have One Future working groups. We actually have a really amazing divestment working group that's done incredible work in the last few months around talking to employers and people in the workplace around divesting pensions from fossil fuels. We work a lot with education and training groups. We work a lot with the Roma community and the traveller community this year around education and strengthening the awareness and the knowledge and the experience of climate justice and how it affects people. And we also have a very strong emerging youth network. So Young Friends of the Earth, some of you are here tonight. They are active in their colleges, they're active in their youth groups. So these are all groups that ebb and flow, and we are here to support you in any way we can in taking action on the things you've heard tonight. And I also just mention, of course, I mentioned before, Young Friends of the Earth and Dublin Friends of the Earth. So we have the issue-based groups, we have loads of local activists, we have our One Future network, and we have a lot of active One Future network groups. There's lots and lots and lots of different ways to engage with our network, and we're here to support you in any way we can in taking action on what you've heard tonight. And we also have, this is more detail, but this is actually quite a cool group, BO Climate Action. This is a group of older people who've come together specifically on the issue of climate justice. That's really interesting. And a lot of our trainings end up forming groups after that as well. So we ran a training last year on extractivism and colonialism. And they have since gone on to form their own groups. So this is a lot of what we do. And I just wanted to hand over now to my colleague Emma Jane to share an invite with you all to continue these conversations in person.
Thanks so much, Rosie. So I hope that this has been really insightful for people, and that people have really enjoyed hearing more about what goes on in the office. We've been growing our team steadily, and I think our work has been progressively growing. And one of the things that we wanted to do is to capitalize on this. There's a huge emphasis. A lot more people are talking about climate, but we know that a lot more people need to be reached. We need to make sure that this is just a topic around every dinner table in Ireland. And that's where we've seen tipping points happen with other social justice movements and wins in Ireland. So we need to start seeing that happen. And we thought that Earth Day being April 22nd, no better day to reclaim than that. So this is something that we want to do. We know that a lot of funding has been coming in to climate action in various different ways through state, EU, lots of different philanthropic kind of sources. But quite a lot of that is still very restrictive, and an awful lot of that is still focused on individual action as opposed to the kind of systemic change that we really need to see. So this is one of the things where I think quite often as activists, we aren't so good at talking about the money and putting our money where our mouth is as well, and asking those around us who maybe aren't so active but might be willing to see that this is an important issue and that's something we need to do more on and more with, and we need more unrestricted funding within the movements for doing that and supporting that work. So one of the things that we wanted to do is to create an opportunity around Earth Day. So April 22nd, we will be doing a couple of things on this moment. So we're using that day to celebrate, to be able to come together. We'll host an event, as Lasheen mentioned earlier, in Bewley's Cafe in Grafton Street in Dublin. That'll be a supporter event. You'll get information out in emails over the coming weeks about that. So we're looking forward to many of you joining us there. But what we wanted to do was also, we know not everybody's going to be able to come to Dublin, but we wanted to open out the invitation and see, would people be willing to host a conversation, a cuppa for climate in their area? But not only to have the conversation, but also to get people to put their money where their mouth is as well, and just say, we need to do more, we need to fundraise for climate action. So really we want to start building that up, that community fundraising, trying to encourage people, to start moving towards this, to have those conversations. Some of them can be difficult, some of them can be really anxiety inducing, as we've heard already tonight. these are things that we need to have. We can't avoid it. You know, the crisis is here. It's not coming. It's already landed. But we need to do more on this. So this is a real invitation for people to come out with us. We'll be sending more information in the resources after the webinar about this, and you'll hear more through your emails as well about Earth Day. But we really do invite you to join us for Earth Day, to come out and maybe to commit to doing a table quiz, a coffee morning, something like this, that you can get friends, family, neighbours, your community involved. If you're in a school, in a workplace, possibly you could host something. And this is just coming back to that part where Rosie said at the very start, organise where you stand. So we hope that this is something that people might get together and collaborate with us on. Just the next slide there, Rosie. So there's a couple of other things maybe just to announce. So we started off with this campaign engagement webinar, and really this came out of us wanting to get better at talking about what goes on in the office and what our key priorities are, where our focuses are, and ways that you can better engage with us. What are the opportunities for us to individually take action, opportunities for us to, you know, collectively coordinate our actions, whether that's individual, your community or group based, and what kind of collective moments might be coming up. So we hope to be able to deliver another campaign engagement webinar later in the year. And in a few moments, I will be asking you for some of your thoughts and reflections on that in terms of how you felt tonight went and what you think we could do better. But so I mentioned already, April 22nd, Earth Day. So we will be having that event in Dublin, the Cuppa for Climate in Bewley's on Grafton Street. But we also are encouraging people to do local community fundraising events in their local areas as well on the day or in and around that weekend. We will be doing some recruitment, so watch this space. We would love to have some of you come and work with us. Many of us, myself included, started as volunteers or activists many moons ago, and here I am working in Friends of the Earth. I've worked in Friends of the Earth Europe, had an opportunity to work with colleagues from the Global South, and I can absolutely recommend working within the network and contributing to this network. And yeah, I definitely encourage people to watch that space. You'll hear an email from us very, very soon. But if you have any questions, don't hesitate to get in touch if you have questions or thoughts around any of those positions that are vacancies that do come up over the summer. So we've got an awful lot of things coming your way in terms of educational events, training, and other kinds of activities. You've heard, I'm sure, become very familiar with our Learning Hub series. So we'll be doing a couple new series, summer series coming out probably in May, June. We'll also be doing a new system change seminar series. These will all be online, so I hope that will reach as many people around the country as possible. So we're really looking forward to as many of you joining, and we will be recording them and making things available as well with other resources as well online on our website. And we'll also be delivering some campaign training. So as Rosie mentioned, she did a very short overview of this massive piece of work she's been working on in terms of the campaign guide, but delivering various skill shares and trainings in relation to that to help us to be able to organize better, whether we're in a local, you know, school, whether you're in a local community, your workplace, things like that. And so watch out for that. There's also Young Friends of the Earth, a new group network that have been established, re-established. A new reimagined version of Young Folk has come about in the last year, which has been amazing. And I think it's a really useful kind of framework for us to look at and to learn from, because these things have been reimagined, they ebb and they flow. But in the last year, Young Folk has been reset up. They've done multiple actions, working groups. We now have representatives on our board here in Friends of the Earth Ireland. We also have representatives on the board in the steering group for Young Friends of the Earth Europe. So I think that there's an awful lot of opportunities there for people to connect in with our wider Friends of the Earth network and family in both the European region and also beyond within Friends of the Earth International. So I do encourage people, if you do know young people in your families, in your lives, in your communities, to reach out and get in touch. And we will be sharing more information about ways that you can get involved with all of those different pieces that Rosie already went through afterwards, so you can get in touch with us about that. But these are kind of just some of the highlights of things that are coming your way. So just the next slide there, Rosie. But before people go, we wanted to be able to ask you to use the chat box, or if that's okay, because this is a new way for us to be able to engage with you and let you know more of what's happening so you have the whole picture of our campaigns and the different kinds of ways that you can get involved in the short term. We wanted to kind of see, how did you find it? Did you find that this was useful? Was it good for you in your activism and understanding how you can be more involved with Friends of the Earth? Did you feel that you now have more information about our priority campaigns? You know, maybe you didn't quite know that we worked on a certain area or that was a priority. So that would be really helpful for us to know. And also, if we were to run another webinar like this later again in the year, what do you think we could do to improve? And how would you like to see it done differently, or things that you thought worked well that you'd like to see more of? So I'll just give people a couple of moments to maybe fill in the chat, because this info.
As of now, we're not sure that the chat is open.
Oh, it should be.
It should be open, and if people can access the Q&A, that's okay.
Yeah, you can use the Q&A if the chat isn't working for you. Absolutely. Thanks for that, Oisin. Yeah, we very much, oh, it says it's disabled, Irene said. Well, absolutely, if you can pop in your thoughts into the Q&A, that would be really wonderful. Your feedback is just essential for us in terms of knowing the kinds of things that make sense for you and ways that you can engage with our work. Brilliant. There's lots of positive feedback. That's fantastic. And people wanting to be more engaged and more involved. That's absolutely wonderful. Yep, absolutely. We're going to I'll pull together an FAQ from all the questions that were asked and the responses, so you can have that to refer to. Absolutely. And any questions that weren't answered that we're able to come up with responses for, we will also add in. Wonderful. Yeah, there's things there that people said that from the chat that they heard about some community-led initiatives going around and that they'd like to know more about those. If people have details of things that they've shared in the chat that you want us to pass on and include, please do send it on to, we've got Rosie's contact detail there afterwards on the last slide, I think, Rosie. So we can, it's just rosie@fo.ie. So if people want to send us in things, we can absolutely include that.
Yeah, for sure. And thanks for mentioning that, Emma-Jane, because I've noticed quite a few questions in the chat about specific issues that people want to take action on. I also want to give a special shout out, I'm going to embarrass them, to Dennis Nealis, who won a campaign that he's been working on for ages around getting better bus access in Galway. And I am just delighted to hear that. That is amazing. And I think it's campaigns like that that are just so inspirational. And if you are kind of thinking that something has really caught your attention, that you really want to take action on in a local context, please do reach out to me. If there isn't already an existing group in your local area, we may know people in the area who are also working on the same thing, or we may just be able to share some resources to help you get going. So please do reach out. And congratulations, Dennis, I'm delighted. I hope you take that bus all the time now. And we got, yeah, we're still getting really useful feedback, and thanks so much. I see a message, Ellie, who do you contact regarding transport? We don't have a specific campaign on transport, but it's something we are looking at more and more. So if you want to reach out to me, I can have a chat with you.
Yeah, this feedback is fantastic. Thank you to everybody who's giving this to us. We really do appreciate it. And I can't believe it. We're actually going to end up wrapping up early. This is amazing. That's something that we weren't planning that we were making progress on and doing better, but hey, I'll take it.
Great.
Okay, I think we can leave it there.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen so that we can see everyone. Great. Well, thank you all so much. It was really, really lovely and really interesting to hear your questions and feedback. And like we said, this will be recorded. It has been recorded, and we'll be sharing resources out on the email. So keep an eye on your emails in the coming days, and we hope to see you very soon. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.